Here we go.
Hi, I'm Anna Barlint, contributing editor of Raven Chronicles Press. Raven is a Northwest literary organization that's been around now since 1991. This is a years-long series called Raven Chronicles Banned Books Project. Raven will be posting on our YouTube channel podcasts of writers reading excerpts from banned books that are meaningful to them or are of historical or literary importance. Today we have Banned Books episode number 12 with Monica West. Monica West is the author of Revival Season, which was a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice, a Barnes and Noble Discover selection, and shortlisted for the VCU, that's Virginia Commonwealth University, VCU Cabell First Novelist Award. Monica received her BA from Duke University, her MA from New York University, and her MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop, where she was a Rona Jaffe Graduate Fellow. She has received fellowships and funding from Breadloaf, Hedgebrook, Kimberlito Fiction, and the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. She currently lives in Seattle, where she is working on her second novel. Welcome, Monica.
Hello, I'm really honored and grateful to be here. Thank you for having me. I am really excited to share a little bit about the banned book that I chose, which is Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison. And in my copy, um, my name is pasted on the front. It may be hard to see that. It's taped on the front, and it's because in a school where I formerly worked in Baltimore, I taught this book multiple times, and every teacher's copy, the way that we distinguish teacher's copies when I was an English teacher for high school from student copies, is that the teacher got a stack of books in our mailbox that had our names on it. So this is kind of my teaching copy. It's my annotated and marked up copy. And it felt really important for me to bring this book to share for this project. Um, Kind of a history of ban attempts on Song of Solomon. It was published originally in 1988, and there have been ban attempts over time. Most first in 1993, it was challenged in Columbus, Ohio, but that challenge was not upheld. It's been challenged since then. In 1994, it was removed from reading lists and library shelves in Richmond County, Georgia. In 1998, there have been complaints in St. Mary's County, Maryland. So the book was removed from the approved text list kind of through the years. And then most recently with bans and then maybe reinstatements. But most recently in 2014, it was banned entirely in Texas due to profanity, sexual content, and incest. And it is one of the most one of my favorite books. It's my favorite book of Toni Morrison's, one of my favorite books of all time, a book I've loved teaching so much, and a book that has kind of shaped how students read and think about literature. So I'm excited to not introduce, I'm excited to read the beginning of Song of Solomon. Chapter 1. The North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance agent promised to fly from Mercy to the other side of Lake Superior at 3 o'clock. 2 days before the event was to take place, he tacked a note on the door of his little yellow house. At 3 o'clock p.m. on Wednesday, the 18th of February, 1931, I will take off from Mercy and fly away on my own wings. Please forgive me. I loved you all. Signed, Robert Smith, insurance agent. Mr. Smith didn't draw as big a crowd as Lindbergh had 4 years earlier. Not more than 40 or 50 people showed up because it was already 11 o'clock in the morning on the very Wednesday he had chosen for his flight before anybody read the note. At that time of day, during the middle of the week, word of mouth news just lumbered along. Children were in school, men were at work, and most of the women were fastening their corsets and getting ready to go see what tails or entrails the butcher might be giving away. Only the unemployed, the self-employed, and the very young were available, deliberately available because they'd heard about it, or accidentally available because they happened to be walking at that exact moment in the shore end of Not Doctor Street, a name that the post office did not recognize. Town maps registered the street as Means Avenue, but the only colored doctor in the city had lived and died on that street. And when he moved there in 1896, his patients took to calling the street, which none of them lived in or near, Doctor Street. Later, when other Negroes moved there, and when the Postal Service became a popular means of transferring messages among them, envelopes from Louisiana, Virginia, Alabama, and Georgia began to arrive addressed to people at house numbers on Doctor Street. The post office workers returned these envelopes or passed them on to the dead letter office. Then, in 1918, when colored men were being drafted, a few gave their address at the recruitment office as Doctor Street. In that way, the name acquired a quasi official status, but not for long. Some of the city legislators, whose concern for appropriate names and the maintenance of the city's landmarks was the principal part of their political life, saw to it that Doctor Street was never used in any official capacity. And since they knew that only Southside residents kept it up, they had notices posted in stores, barber shops, and restaurants in that part of the city saying that the avenue running northerly and southerly from Shore Road, fronting the lake to the junction of Route 6 and 2, leading to Pennsylvania, and also running parallel to and between Rutherford Avenue and Broadway, had always been and would always be known as Mains Avenue and not Doctor Street. It was a genuinely clarifying public notice because it gave Southside residents a way to keep their memories alive and please the city legislators as well. They called it not Doctor Street and were inclined to call the charity hospital on its northern end No Mercy Hospital, since it was 1931, on the day following Mr. Smith's leaps from its cupola, before the first colored expectant mother was allowed to give birth inside its wards and not on its steps. The reason for the hospital's generosity to that particular woman was not the fact that she was the only child of this Negro doctor, for during his entire professional life, he had never been granted hospital privileges, and only two of his patients were ever admitted to Mercy, both white. Besides, the doctor had been dead a long time by 1931. It must have been Mr. Smith's leap from the roof over their heads that made them admit her. In any case, whether or not the little insurance agent's conviction that he could fly contributed to the place of her delivery, it certainly contributed to its time. When the dead doctor's daughter saw Mr. Smith emerge as promptly as he had promised from behind the cupola, his wide blue silk wings curved forward around his chest, she dropped her covered peck basket, spilling red velvet rose petals. The wind blew them about, up, down, and into small mounds of snow. Her half-grown daughters scrambled about, trying to catch them, while their mother moaned and held the underside of her stomach. The rose petal scramble got a lot of attention, but the pregnant lady's moans did not. Everyone knew the girls had spent hour after hour tracing, cutting, and stitching the costly velvet, and that Gerhardt's department store would be quick to reject any that were soiled. It was nice and gay there for a while. The men joined in trying to collect the scraps before the snow soaked through them, snatching them from a gust of wind or plucking them delicately from the snow. And the very young children couldn't make up their minds whether to watch the man circled in blue on their roof or the bits of red flashing around on the ground. Their dilemma was solved when a woman suddenly burst into song. The singer, standing at the back of the crowd, was as poorly dressed as the doctor's daughter was well dressed. The latter had on a neat gray coat with a traditional pregnant woman bow at her navel, a black cloche, and a pair of four-button ladies' galoshes. The singing woman wore a knitted navy cap pulled far down over her forehead. She had wrapped herself up in an old quilt instead of a winter coat. Her head cocked to one side, her eyes fixed on Mr. Robert Smith, she sang in a powerful contralto. "Oh, sugar man, done fly away, sugar man, done gone, sugar man cut across the sky, sugar man gone home." A few of the half a hundred or so people gathered there nudged each other and sniggered. Others listened as though it were the helpful and defining piano music in a silent movie. They stood this way for some time, none of them crying out to Mr. Smith, all of them preoccupied with one or the other of the minor events about them, until the hospital people came. They had been watching from the windows at first with mild curiosity. Then, as the crowd seemed to swell to the very walls of the hospital, they watched with apprehension. They wondered if one of those things that racial uplift groups were always organizing was taking place. But when they saw neither placards nor speakers, they ventured outside into the cold, white coated surgeons, dark jacketed business and personnel clerks, and three nurses in starched jumpers. The sight of Mr. Smith and his wide blue wings transfixed them for a few seconds, as did the woman singing and the roses strewn about. Some of them thought briefly that this was probably some form of worship. Philadelphia, where Father Divine reigned, wasn't all that far away. Perhaps the young girls holding baskets of flowers were two of his virgins. But the laughter of a gold-toothed man brought them back to their senses. They stopped daydreaming and swiftly got down to business, giving orders. Their shouts and bustling caused great confusion, where before there had been only a few men and some girls playing with pieces of velvet and a woman singing. One of the nurses, hoping to bring some efficiency into the disorder, searched the faces around her until she saw a stout woman who looked as though she might move the earth if she wanted to. You, she said, moving toward the stout woman, are these your children? The stout woman turned her head slowly, her eyebrows lifted at the carelessness of the address. Then, seeing where the voice came from, she lowered her brows and veiled her eyes. Ma'am, send one around back to the emergency office. Tell him to go to tell the guard to get over here quick. That boy there can go. That one. She pointed to a cat-eyed boy about 5 or 6 years old. The stout woman slid her eyes down the nurse's finger and looked at the child she was pointing to. Guitar, ma'am. What? Guitar. The nurse gazed at the stout woman as though she had spoken Welsh. Then she closed her mouth, looked again at the cat-eyed boy, and, lacing her fingers, spoke her next words very slowly to him. Listen. Go around to the back of the hospital to the guard's office. It will say emergency admissions on the door. ADMISIONS. But the guard will be there. Tell him to get over here on the double. Move now. Move. She unlaced her fingers and made scooping motions with her hands, the palms pushing against the wintry air. A man in a brown suit came toward her, puffing little white clouds of breath. Fire truck's on its way. Get back inside. You'll freeze to death. The nurse nodded. You left out a S, ma'am, the boy said. The North was new to him, and he had just begun to learn he could speak up to white people. But she'd already gone, rubbing her arms against the cold. Granny, she left out a S. And a please. You reckon he'll jump? A nut wagon'll do anything. Who is he? Collects insurance. A nut wagon. Who's that lady singing? That, baby, is the very last thing in pea time. But she smiled when she looked at the singing woman, so the cat-eyed boy listened to the musical performance with at least as much interest as he devoted to the man flapping his wings on the top of the hospital. The crowd was beginning to be a little nervous now that the law was being called in. They each knew Mr. Smith. He came to their houses twice a month to collect $1.68 and write down on a little yellow card both the date and their 84 cents a week payment. They were always half a month or so behind and talked endlessly to him about paying ahead after they had a preliminary discussion about what he was doing back so soon anyway. You back in here already? Look like I just got rid of you. I'm tired of seeing your face, really tired. I knew it. Soon as I get 2 dimes back to back, here you come, more regular than the Reaper. Do Hoover know about you? They kidded him, abused him, told their children to tell him they were out sick or gone to Pittsburgh. But they held on to those little yellow cards as though they meant something, laid them gently in the shoebox along with the rent receipts, marriage licenses, and expired factory identification badges. Mr. Smith smiled through it all, managing to keep his eyes focused almost the whole time on his customers' feet. He wore a business suit for his work, but his house was no better than theirs. He never had a woman that any of them knew about and said nothing in church but an occasional amen. He never beat anybody up and he wasn't seen after dark, so they thought he was probably a nice man. But he was heavily associated with illness and death, neither of which was distinguishable from the brown picture of the North Carolina Mutual Life building on the back of their yellow cards. Jumping from the roof of Mercy was the most interesting thing he had done. None of them had suspected he had it in him. Just goes to show, they murmured to each other, you never really do know about people. The singing woman quieted down and, humming the tune, walked through the crowd toward the rose petal lady, who was still cradling her stomach. You should make yourself warm, she whispered to her, touching her lightly on the elbow. A little bird'll be here with the morning. Oh, said the rose petal lady, tomorrow morning? That's the only morning coming. It can't be, the rose petal lady said. It's too soon. No, it ain't. Right on time. The women were looking deep into each other's eyes when a loud roar went up from the crowd, a kind of wavy ooh sound. Mr. Smith had lost his balance for a second and was trying gallantly to hold on to a triangle of wood that jutted from the cupola. Immediately, the singing woman began again. Oh, sugar man done fly. Oh, sugar man done gone. Downtown, the firemen pulled on their greatcoats, but when they arrived at Mercy, Mr. Smith had seen the rose petals, heard the music, and leaped on into the air.
I keep forgetting these mutes, unmutes. That is such a wonderful, wonderful opening scene of a book. I mean, it reads like a movie scene.
Yeah, it's
There's so
incredible.
many, yeah, yeah. I mean, and I mean, actually, I just read it again last week
Yeah,
because you were doing this, and I wanted to kind of like reframe my brain
right.
back to. I mean, I've read the book times, but that scene sets so many into motion. It doesn't, it doesn't give you a clue to what actual Song of Solomon, what that means yet. In
Right.
introducing you to a time and place, you want to talk a little bit? Why did you choose to actually? I mean, it makes sense to start at the beginning,
Mhm.
but it's also a very complex theme. What made you choose to actually start
I
right there?
think number one, Toni Morrison is just really incredible at making her worlds. And her worlds are so self-contained and they are so specific and there's so much of their particular towns and spaces. And so I love the way that you learn about um, you know, the way that they kind of think about themselves in terms of going from calling it Doctor Street and trying to make that official and then it becoming not Doctor Street and that kind of becomes codified. It kind of shows the sway of the town and the way that people kind of retain power. I love the fact that this man who is in some sense, like you don't know at the very beginning. I mean, the book begins with this really kind of confusing open sentence. The North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance agent promised to fly from Mercy to the other side of Lake Superior at 3 o'clock, right? We don't
Yeah,
yet know. Like, that's
yeah,
our opening, right? She just drops you in there. And then the rest of the beginning kind of unpacks a little bit of that promise of kind of by the end, we know that it's Mr. Smith. We know how he works for insurance and we know how he's part of the community, even though he's a little bit of an outsider, and how the community, even as they don't feel like they know him, kind of still embrace him and talk about him and kind of absorb him. And so I think it's a beautiful example of the way community works and the way that she builds it and
mhm,
builds a world. And so to then, you're absolutely right that the rest of the novel kind of shifts. Like the next part goes into the doctor's family and and what happens with like milkman and guitar and but this idea of place and community and space is such a beautiful opening, and this beautiful image of a man with with feathers and silk on top of a hospital that doesn't admit black patients, called Mercy Hospital, is just amazing. She's just
Wow.
always inverting things and changing how you believe things. And you think something's real, but then something's not real, and people are flying. Maybe he flies at the end. And it just kind of sets up the magic that follows. And so it just felt like the perfect thing to read, even though it is a little bit disorienting.
Great. Yeah.
Um, I'm curious as to kind of like how I mean, this book being banned, the reasons for banning it, you went into this whole history of attempts to ban it way before, this kind of recent thing of banned books. And what was the premise in general that the ban was trying to operate on?
It's generally about sexual content, and more specifically incest. That is part of the book. That actually comes in a chapter that comes soon after. And so those are the reasons why other places have, sought to ban the book. It's the basis on which Texas banned the book. And so that was always some of the belief behind why to ban it. And I mean, yeah, it's a part of the book, and it's not the entirety of the book. And it's the book, as we see, the people are really complex, and so there are layers to them and layers to their relationships. And I feel like even Morrison um gives us this relationship. She gives us incest in this book, and we're allowed to kind of do something with it. It's not, we can't just like take things away that we decide as societally, that we don't, kind of approve of as society. Morrison gives us the tools to kind of like make sense of it in this larger world that she's trying to get us to make sense of in the beginning. It just kind of layers the world that she presents. So those are the reasons that they've kind of linked, offensive content, sexually explicit content, and incest is why they've chosen, why it has been banned, or just deemed inappropriate for young people.
Well, it's interesting because I've done a lot of like looking at the different reasons that different books are banned. And overwhelmingly, the question of sex and incest is the reason.
Yep.
And of course, it shows up in almost all Toni Morrison's
Yes.
in one way or
Yes.
another.
Yep.
But, it's also, I've become slightly suspicious of that as,
Hmm.
the reason for banning it, because that's
Hmm.
kind of like an easy thing.
Yep.
But what really struck me when you were reading that scene and the whole thing about community is that it shows you the subtle kind of shifts in the community.
Hmm.
And like the little piece I really, really love is when what's she called? Just the stout woman.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, and she's talking to the nurse, sort of like taking charge. And she picks this kid, and it's like the name guitar
Hmm.
doesn't even occur to be a possibility for a name, right? So
Exactly.
there's all these little things revealed about the community, about the way people are connected, and also kind of like how that's a little bit frayed.
Yes.
And I can't help but think that has an awful lot to do with why it's banned.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a way, even from the very beginning, the community, and all of her books, the community, like relationships between people are never really easily defined. I mean, there's always something where, there's something that like maybe veers away from how we understand a parental relationship should be. But her novels are so capacious that there's space for all of those things. There's space for this person who's collecting insurance, and the families never really can pay him on time, but there's space to have grace for him. And so I feel like in a community, in a town like this, in a space where you don't actually have your own street, but you're gonna have to kind of make a name that feels official. There has to be space for all the people who live in there. And it just can't be the people who you agree with or who you understand. I mean, there's lots of aspersions cast on what happens with the doctor's family, and the incest that comes along, and some of those relationships. And Morrison just gives it to us and then lets us do the work. And I feel like to take that away from someone and say, I don't agree with that, therefore don't read it, just takes away from the critical work that we're supposed to do as readers, the critical work that I asked my students to do when I was teaching. And just sanitizes everything. And so I totally agree with you that it's sex, sure, that's easy, but it's also about kind of this really complicated portrayal of a community that's going against norms and also thriving. I think both things are true, or thriving in its own way.
Yes, and also that vision that she has, which is based on reality, it's not just like a pipe dream. This
Right.
is the real world. This is how it,
Exactly. Exactly.
Well,
it really does a lot about breaking down barriers that people that haven't had any contact, Black people with white people in a certain situation,
Hmm.
and it breaks down these kind of stereotype notions. So she's actually modeling kind of like, in all kinds of complex ways, how we can be different with one another in
Hmm.
terms of, different identities and stuff. And
Right.
that just seems like that is so, so important. And
Exactly.
yeah, that's what they want to take away.
and
Yes.
also, I just want to add one thing is that I just saw PBS had uh, the poll saying that they approved that audiobooks are just as good for kids or whatever as reading. And I totally disagree with that. And this book is an important example, is that reading, that's how I learn, that's how you learn how to think. That's how reading, a great deal, especially for kids like me who are just totally isolated and, couldn't really work with other kids, and I was kind of like in my world because of books. And that is a way it could teach you so many things. But the act of reading on the page, I think it does something to the brain that
Yes.
listening doesn't do. But that's just my opinion. But I do think reading is so important still.
Yeah. I do think that I think that what's important about audio is that it's an accessibility tool, right? For
Right.
some
That's
people
true.
who,
That's
if
true.
there's
Oh
I've
yeah.
had students who kind of really have issues with kind of tracking visual text and then listening, but I always would tell my students, especially for school and for
Right.
class,
Right.
read and listen. So have
Right.
the audio, but also have the book
Yeah.
open and kind of stop and notice what you're seeing on the page because there are ways that we're always so attuned to audio that it's easy to kind of absorb it and kind of
Right.
not, and we
Yeah.
could do it when we're reading too, but I think that I don't think that one can replace the other. I think that just because
Right.
one's becoming more popular, I don't think that it
Yeah.
should replace the other. A lot of times it can be used in tandem, and especially for
Yeah.
my students who had real learning differences, it's like,
Yeah.
okay, absolutely listen to this as slowly as you need to, pause it, stop it, go back, but have the book as well. I think both of those
Yeah.
things can be really
We didn't
important.
have those options, we were
Absolutely.
kids,
Right.
audio,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
different than it is
Yeah.
now.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Monica, I had a question in terms of because you were actually teaching this book
Hmm.
and you said you taught it multiple times.
Yes.
And I'm interested in kind of like, what grade and what the composition of the class was, including
Hmm.
what you just talked about, kids
Hmm.
with learning differences, and how the kids overall responded to the book, and whether it was different, whether you had a multiple experiences or whether there was sort of a thread that ran through always of how what the response was.
Yeah, so I have exclusively taught this book to upper grade levels in high school. So 11th and 12th, no lower than that. It's complicated. It's complicated language wise. She's like it's not the most accessible of her books, and so anything younger than I think 11th grade for me was just like a little too young to teach it. And taught it in kind of conjunction with thinking about American narratives and American stories. And I, hands down, my students love this book because I feel like it's about a journey and about a quest to find identity. And it feels really ripe for a time when students are kind of being fed different, it's easy to kind of go one way, go the other, and, to watch a journey, to watch Milkman's journey, to watch Guitar's journey. I think to watch the journey into kind of adulthood or the journey away from what I've always known into something that's my own, I think is really important for students. And so they always resonated with it. Hands down, my students love this book. So that, by the end of the year, I mean, and I think they love it too because they have to work for it. It's not something that comes easily. We have to do a lot of discussion. They have lots of questions, but they work for it, they work hard for it, and then they're really rewarded for it in the end. And it's a book that works really well because, a lot of it can be discussed. And I mean, we'd sometimes discuss for multiple classes about certain sections, and like, but let's come back to this one. This happened again. Let's bring this up again, or this is a new motif. And they really got into it. It's a really fun book to teach.
Yeah, and what was the composition of your classes in terms of diversity and
Oh, diversity. So in
animal?
this, yeah, often almost always, I taught this book when I was teaching in Baltimore, so like a while before. I would say I said 11th to 12th graders, and usually about like black and white. It was like the diversity of like the school that I worked at in Baltimore, about maybe 60% white students, 40% black students, mix of gender. Yeah. And like generally that was like kind of the makeup. I think by the time in my old school, by the time 11th and 12th grade hit, students could kind of pick the courses they were going to be into. They weren't like kind of randomly assigned. So you could pick among the list of kind of, okay, for my seminar for the fall, here's the class I'm going to take. And then also the school that high school I most recently taught at is in San Francisco, and this was an 11th grade text, required 11th grade text for kind of all students. And I didn't teach 11th grade at that school. I focused more on the younger grades, but again, to a student, the students I was always engaged with loved this book so much, and we talked about it, informally in the hallways about how much they loved it, or at the questions they had, or they'd come to me and say, Miss West, did you know about this part? I said, of course I know about that part, and we'd talk about it. It was really fun.
Yeah, sounds wonderful. Yeah. And I think what you just said about the kind of like you have to work at it, I think that could just be said for anyone who reads Toni Morrison.
Yep.
He's not handing you something simple on a platter.
Nope.
It's rich, and it's kind of like, you have to do a lot of digesting and, you know, thinking through, and there's so many levels that she's operating on.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a
And
lot of discovery to have.
absolutely. And then to kind of have them sit with this idea of complexity and the fact that I've read this book, I can't tell you how many times. I don't know if I understand all of it. And it's okay to not understand all of it. Then you go back and you kind of uncover more. And on each subsequent reading, you feel like you get a better sense of it. But I don't think I understand everything here. And I think to have them, for students for whom they're expected to kind of like there's like this idea of mastery, which is false, and like I must understand everything or at this really high level. It's okay to be confused about something and to wrestle with something and to even think one way and then think differently in the next kind of several weeks or months or so, to let them know that that's okay. That's part of being critical, and that's part of being a thinker, and that's part of being a learner, and let them kind of experience some of the frustration, but then also the joy that comes at the end of the reward that comes at the end of like really trying to puzzle through and even say, I don't know if I fully understand it, but I know that I really, really appreciate it and I love it.
Well, I have one last question
Sure.
for you. They just told me my internet connection's unstable, so hopefully I'm not freezing. Well, it's very interesting to actually have someone that taught this book, a book that is banned in schools,
Hmm.
and someone that has experience of teaching this and the impact of it and how much students loved it and what they got from it. So, what do you think? What is it by banning this book? So, there's
Hmm.
a whole number of schools now that cannot, if even if a teacher wanted to, they cannot include this in the curriculum. What is it that the school and those kids are going to miss out on? That's that there's not something else that just takes over from it.
Hmm. I I mean, I honestly think if, if not just Song of Solomon, but so many of Toni Morrison's books are banned. And so by not letting students read this, or not letting students read Beloved or Sula or The Bluest Eye, I feel like, I mean, Toni Morrison is just like one writer of a multitude of writers, is potentially one of the most consequential voices of our lifetime, kind of like in fiction, and one of the most influential writers. To deny students the chance to kind of explore that, even if they don't understand it, even if they don't like it. I learned so much from books that I don't like, or I learned so much from books I don't fully understand. It's such a deprivation in a school where my job, I felt like, is to I want to, there's skills that the students need to learn, but I also feel like reading is an exercise in empathy. And so this idea of what does it mean to kind of take yourself and make yourself someone standing at the foot of this hospital looking up at this person. You would never be that person. It's not 1931, but what would that be like if you had to do that? And I feel like taking these books away and giving these students experiences that might kind of align more toward theirs just removes them. Like, I think that one of the huge things that's happening in this country right now that's so problematic is that people just don't have empathy anymore. This idea of something is so different from you and so removed from you that you can't understand it. And teaching students books from all perspectives that are similar to theirs and vastly different just gives them that exercise. It really, really kind of, removes that, moves that muscle. And to take that away on besides the fact of students missing out on an opportunity to kind of discover some of the best literature that's been written in our lifetime, but it also takes away the chance to kind of teach them how to empathize. And I feel like whatever you give them, I mean, they're porous at that age and they're trying to learn what it means to kind of be a citizen. And one of the huge things about being a citizen is learning how to empathize. And by taking that away, I think that that's a huge, huge loss for students.
Well, thank you, Monica. I mean, I think
Yeah.
ending with the importance of empathy is
Yeah.
perfect. Yes, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. This was really, really a joy. I mean, both the book and then thinking back on my days teaching it, it brings me like really good feelings and thoughts.
Your students were lucky.
Oh,
Yeah.
thanks.
Very. Thank you. Thanks,
Thanks for
Anna.
having me.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.